Jack wandered through the alien marketplace, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning for anything that could make his day a little less miserable. He was broke, tired, and definitely not in the mood to deal with anything out of the ordinary. The galaxy was full of strange creatures and even stranger customs, but for Jack, it was just another day in a never-ending series of disappointments. As he turned the corner, a high-pitched scream shattered his thoughts. Without thinking, Jack ran toward the source. What he saw next was beyond comprehension. An alien princess, clothed in regal garb and unmistakable beauty, laying unconscious on the ground surrounded by a few aggressive-looking beings who were clearly not there to help. Jack didn't even stop to consider the danger. His instinct kicked in, and he rushed to her side. His hands shook as he checked her pulse, realizing that she was still alive, barely. Without thinking about the consequences, he scooped her up in his arms and made a mad dash for the nearest exit. The aliens trailing behind them weren't too happy about it. Jack glanced over his shoulder just as one of them started shouting in some language he couldn't understand, but it didn't matter. The human reflexes took over, and Jack pushed through the crowd, hoping the princess would survive this mess. He found a small alcove, out of sight. Kneeling, Jack pulled out an emergency medkit from his bag, his mind racing. He had no idea what this alien was, but the basics were the same: first aid, oxygen, a way to stabilize her until help arrived. If it arrived. He had no idea what he was doing, but Jack had enough experience with people getting hurt. It was just part of the life he'd led, always a mess, always fixing things just enough to get by. As the princess gasped for air, her eyes fluttered open, and Jack froze. He expected a scream, a look of panic. Instead, she blinked slowly, her eyes taking in the surroundings as if nothing were unusual. "You saved me?" she whispered, her voice weak but still commanding. Jack hesitated, looking around. Did she just speak in perfect English? Was this a weird dream? Yeah, I guess so. I'm Jack," he stammered, feeling completely out of his depth. "And you are?" She tilted her head, blinking a few times before replying. "Zara. Princess Zara of the Yelto Empire." Jack froze. This was a joke, right? Alien princess? Yelto Empire? That kind of crap only happened in bad movies. "Wait, what?" he blurted, looking at her like she had two heads. "Princess? Like royal? Yelto Empire? You're an actual princess?" "Yes," she said simply, her tone carrying an air of regal authority even in her weakened state. "You have saved me, human. You have broken the law of my people." Jack blinked, his mind racing. "What law?" She leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing as if trying to process the situation. "The law of gratitude. In our culture, saving someone's life comes with a traditional repayment, marriage." Jack blinked again, staring at her with disbelief. "Wait, what? Marriage? You're telling me that you expect me to marry you because I saved you from some goons?" Zara sighed, as though explaining a basic fact of life. "Yes, it is the custom. You saved my life. The price is marriage." Jack shook his head, trying to make sense of the absurdity of it all. "Look, I'm not some marriage material. I mean, I'm just a guy trying to get by. This is insane. I didn't ask to save your life, and I definitely didn't sign up for a wedding." Zara regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "I did not ask for this either. But it is the law. You saved me, and I will honor the traditions of my people." Jack ran his hand through his hair, clearly at a loss. "This is ridiculous. There's no way I'm marrying you. I don't even know you. What am I supposed to do with a princess? I'm just a guy from Earth. A broke guy who can't even get a date back home." Zara's lips quirked into a smile. "It seems we are both trapped by our traditions then, Jack." Jack stood up, pacing. "I don't care about your traditions. I don't care about your empire. I'm not marrying anyone. This is nuts. You can't just go around telling people they have to get married because they saved your life." She raised an eyebrow. "In my culture, It is considered an honor to marry someone who has saved your life. You should consider yourself fortunate. Fortunate? For what? For getting tangled up in your royal mess? I don't want to be married to anyone, especially not a princess. I'm not exactly cut out for that kind of life. Zara seemed to study him for a moment, before speaking again. You misunderstand. This marriage is not just for me. It is also for the benefit of your people. A marriage to a royal alliance would solidify our empire's relationship. It is diplomatic, not personal. Jack groaned. Yeah, well, I didn't sign up for any diplomatic mission. I just wanted a hot meal and a safe place to sleep. Now I'm supposed to become your husband? This is insane. You saved my life, she repeated, her voice soft but firm. And now you must marry me. Jack's brain scrambled, trying to come up with some kind of escape plan. He had no idea what kind of consequences this might bring to him, but he sure as hell didn't want to be stuck in some intergalactic marriage arrangement. There had to be a way out of this mess. There had to be. But before Jack could think of anything else, the doors to the alcove burst open. A group of regal-looking aliens entered, their eyes locking on Jack with cold intensity. He barely had time to react before one of them spoke in a language that Jack couldn't understand, but he didn't need to. It was obvious that these were the officials who ran the Yelto Empire, and they were not here for negotiations. Zara sat up straighter, the regal composure returning to her. It is decided, she said. The human has agreed to the marriage. Jack turned to her, his face incredulous. What? No! I haven't agreed to anything. She shot him a look that said it all. The law is the law. You will marry me. Jack was caught in a whirlwind of alien customs, political pressure, and now a marriage that he was definitely not ready for. His mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but before he could come up with a plan, Zara's people were already moving forward, setting the wheels in motion. He was screwed. This was either going to be the weirdest marriage of all time or a diplomatic nightmare, and Jack was about to get a crash course in intergalactic diplomacy, whether he liked it or not. Jack sat, dumbfounded, as the regal-looking aliens surrounding him began speaking in a language that sounded like a mix of growls and purrs. He couldn't understand a word, but it was clear they were making decisions about him like he wasn't even in the room. His hands were still clammy from the adrenaline, and his mind was a mess of confusion, frustration, and disbelief. He was caught up in something way over his head. He shot Zara a pleading look. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't even know you were a princess until 2 minutes ago. What the hell is going on? Zara, despite the gravity of the situation, gave him a small, almost apologetic smile. Jack, you've already saved my life. The laws of my people demand this. There is no other way. He rubbed his temples, trying to process what was happening. I don't know how to be a husband to anyone, let alone a princess. I don't even know how your planet works. Hell, I barely know how my own works. Zara's smile faded, and she looked at him with something akin to sympathy. I understand, Jack. But there are customs to follow. We cannot simply disregard them. Just as Jack was about to protest further, the alien officials turned to him, their expressions serious. One of them, a particularly tall and imposing figure with 6 arms, pointed directly at Jack and began speaking rapidly in the same unintelligible language. Zara, ever the composed princess, translated for him. He is offering you an audience with the High Council, she said softly. It is a formality. You must attend to discuss the terms of our marriage. Terms? Jack repeated, his voice edged with incredulity. What do you mean, terms? I thought this was a thank you for saving my life thing, not a goddamn business contract. Zara's eyes softened. It is tradition, Jack. And this marriage, while it is an agreement between us, also represents the unity of our people. It holds significance beyond what you understand. Jack wanted to scream. All he wanted was to go home, to have a peaceful life without any of this insanity. But here he was, standing on an alien planet, being offered an official position in a diplomatic marriage he didn't want and didn't understand. He had no idea how to handle this, how to talk his way out of it, or if there even was a way out. A deep sigh escaped him as he dropped his head into his hands. This is ridiculous. Zara watched him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. I know this is difficult, Jack. But it is not just about us. It is about your people, too. Your survival. Earth has its place in this galaxy, and your actions, whether you realize it or not, have set things in motion. Jack looked up at her, blinking. What do you mean, my people? What does my being here have to do with Earth? I didn't even want to be here in the first place. I'm just a guy. A guy with no money, no future. Zara's expression softened again, her eyes darkening as if she were seeing something Jack couldn't quite grasp. You are far more important than you think, Jack. You are the catalyst for something much bigger than yourself. Jack's head swam with the implications, but before he could say anything else, the alien officials gestured for him to follow. He glanced at Zara, who nodded slightly, as if encouraging him to go along with whatever came next. There was no escaping it now. He had no choice but to play along. They walked through a series of corridors, the air thick with alien perfumes and the faint hum of technology he couldn't even begin to understand. Jack couldn't help but feel out of place. The whole palace, if that's what it was, seemed like something straight out of a science fiction movie, and he was the unwilling protagonist of this bizarre narrative. As they entered a massive room that looked like a cross between a courtroom and a grand council hall, Jack's eyes widened. The room was filled with aliens, different species, some humanoid, some not, but all of them exuded a sense of power and authority. They all turned toward him as he stepped in, and Jack suddenly felt like he was being put on trial for something he hadn't even done. Zara stepped forward, her regal posture unwavering. My people, this is Jack, she said, her voice clear and commanding. The human who saved my life. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Jack's heart began to race. He didn't know what to expect, but it certainly wasn't this. He half expected someone to point at him and yell, "Off with his head!" or whatever the equivalent was in alien cultures. But instead, one of the council members, a tiny, purple alien with 3 eyes and a voice like gravel, stepped forward. You saved Princess Zara's life, human? He asked, his voice dripping with curiosity. Jack nodded, his throat dry. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I didn't know she was a princess, but I did what I could. And now you are to marry her as per our laws? The 3-eyed alien continued. Jack tried to keep his cool. Yeah, apparently. He could already feel the awkwardness settling in. But that's not exactly what I signed up for. The council member leaned forward, an amused glint in his multiple eyes. It is not a matter of signing up, human. It is the law. Your actions have put you in this position. But do not worry, marriage to the princess will be beneficial. You will be given great honor and many rewards. Jack let out a short laugh. Yeah, well, I didn't want honor or rewards. I just wanted to get home. Zara, standing beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm. You may not understand now, but soon you will. This marriage will help your people. Jack glanced at her, still skeptical. Help my people? You mean this is some kind of political move, right? Some marry the human to show we mean business thing? Zara gave a small, reluctant nod. In part. But it is also about creating a bond between our two species. Earth has potential, Jack. Your world is not as insignificant as you believe. It is a new player in a much larger game. The weight of her words hit him. Great, now I'm the pawn in the middle of a galactic chess game. Zara didn't argue. She merely looked at him with a knowing expression. You have no idea how important this moment is, Jack. And you have no idea how much it will change your life. Jack wasn't sure whether he should laugh or cry. He was about to marry an alien princess as part of a galactic political maneuver, and there didn't seem to be anything he could do about it. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. Jack stared out of the transport shuttle window, the alien city sprawling below him in all its technicolor glory. The buildings were impossibly tall, made of materials that glinted like silver, yet shimmered in strange, ever-shifting hues. He couldn't help but wonder if he was dreaming. No, this wasn't a dream. This was a nightmare wrapped in a beautiful, neon-colored package. He was actually on an alien world, heading to his impending marriage to a princess he barely knew. It wasn't just absurd, it was completely surreal. Zara sat across from him, radiating calmness as usual, her expression unreadable. She'd been quiet since the council meeting, and Jack wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. His mind kept circling the same thoughts over and over again. How the hell did he end up in this situation? Was he being punished by the universe for being a decent guy? Did he miss the memo that said being a good Samaritan led to marrying aliens? He sighed and leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. He knew that Zara had to be just as frustrated as he was, but she wasn't showing it. In fact, she was downright regal. He, on the other hand, felt like a monkey in a tuxedo. "You know," he began, his voice low and incredulous, "this whole thing could have been avoided. Just a little thank you and I'd be on my way back to Earth. But no, now I'm about to marry a princess, because apparently that's how you repay someone for saving your life in this galaxy." Zara looked at him with a small, enigmatic smile. "It's more complicated than that, Jack. It's not about gratitude. It's about tradition." "Tradition? You're telling me that the only way to thank someone for saving your life is through marriage?" Jack scoffed. "Why not a gold medal or a statue or something? At least that would make sense." Zara shifted slightly, her expression softening. "Our culture is very different from yours. We believe that marriage is a binding of fates. It's a way of creating an unbreakable bond between two beings, one that extends beyond just the individual and into the collective. My people believe that bonds like these are sacred." Jack rubbed his temples. "So what, I'm supposed to just go with the flow and get married to someone I barely know because it's sacred? This is ridiculous." Zara's smile faded, and her eyes softened with a hint of empathy. "I know this is hard for you, Jack. But it is what it is. The law is clear, and there's no changing it now. You've saved my life, and now we must fulfill the agreement. That's how our system works." Jack huffed, slumping further into his seat. "Well, I hope your system includes a how to avoid marrying a princess chapter, because I sure could use one right about now." Zara tilted her head, her eyes glinting with amusement. "You may find, Jack, that things are not always as they seem. This marriage, while a matter of law, might not be as burdensome as you believe." "Really?" Jack's tone was filled with sarcasm. "Because last I checked, being forced into marriage wasn't exactly on the list of fun activities." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "I'm not saying it will be easy, but there's more to this than you realize. Perhaps there is a way for both of us to benefit from it." Her gaze lingered on him, her eyes suddenly more intense. Jack blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in her tone. "Wait, are you telling me this could be good for both of us? How?" Zara's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "I didn't say that. But perhaps you should keep an open mind." She sat back, resuming her usual calm composure. Jack was left staring at her, completely lost in the turn of events. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he had a feeling it wouldn't be anything that made his life easier. As if things weren't complicated enough already, now he was tangled up in alien politics and, somehow, romance. And the worst part was, a part of him was starting to wonder if it might actually not be that bad. They arrived at the palace, another vast structure that seemed to stretch to the heavens, and Jack felt a rush of anxiety hit him all at once. He wasn't sure what he was more nervous about, the upcoming marriage ceremony or the fact that he was about to meet more aliens who seemed way too comfortable with the whole situation. Every step they took seemed to be followed by whispers, their voices a constant hum in the background as they made their way through the grand halls. Zara led him through a series of chambers, each more opulent than the last. Finally, they entered a large room where a group of alien dignitaries awaited them. They all stared at Jack as though they were expecting something from him. He was getting used to the feeling of being the center of attention, but it didn't make him feel any more comfortable. He was starting to feel like a prize on display. As Zara introduced him to the council members, Jack couldn't help but think about how completely out of place he was. These people had known this was coming, and they treated it like some elaborate formality. To them, it was business as usual. But to him? It was like being dropped into a pit of chaos with no clear way out. One of the council members, a towering figure with sharp, angular features, looked Jack up and down with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "So," he began, his voice low and grating, "you are the one who has agreed to marry Princess Zara?" Jack tried to keep his composure, but his nerves were getting the better of him. Yeah? That's me, I guess. The lucky guy." There was a pause before the alien dignitary nodded. "You should be honored. Not many get the privilege of joining with a royal in such a way. Your bond will be a symbol of unity across the galaxies." Jack blinked. Right? Sure. I'll take your word for it." Zara smiled at his awkwardness, clearly trying to stifle a laugh. She knew exactly how out of place Jack felt, but the situation was what it was, and she couldn't change it. Still, there was something endearing about watching him squirm. It was funny, until it wasn't. As the meeting continued, Jack's mind kept drifting back to Zara's earlier words. "There's more to this than you realize." Could it be that, despite everything, there was something he wasn't seeing? Something deeper, something that could make this whole disaster worth it? The idea kept nagging at him as the meeting stretched on, but he couldn't let himself get distracted. The reality of his situation was staring him right in the face. Marriage to a princess. Alien politics. Galactic diplomacy. And worst of all, the feeling that he was in way over his head. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. The palace banquet was in full swing, with guests from various alien factions mingling and chatting in a blur of colorful robes and bizarre headpieces. He felt like he was in the middle of an intergalactic fashion show. And yet, here he was, standing beside Zara, pretending like he wasn't the awkward, uncomfortable human who had accidentally gotten himself tangled up in a diplomatic nightmare. Zara, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease, like this was just another Tuesday in her royal life. Jack hated how much she made it look effortless. "Relax," Zara whispered, nudging Jack gently. "It's just a party." "Oh, sure," Jack muttered, glancing around the room. "Just a party where I'm the main attraction. No big deal." He tried to adjust the collar of his formal tunic, an ill-fitting alien outfit they'd given him for the occasion, and failed miserably. "God, I look ridiculous in this." Zara gave him an amused look, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "You'll get used to it. Besides, the worst part is already behind us. We've survived the council. Now we just need to survive the party. I'm not sure I want to survive this." Jack's voice had a bitter edge. He gestured toward a group of aliens at a nearby table. "Is that guy wearing a feathered hat, or is his head just that, fluffy?" Zara chuckled. "That's Lord Zerax. He's part of the Asari delegation. They have very eccentric fashion choices." Jack leaned closer to her, lowering his voice. "Is he a walking carpet, or is that just his hair?" Zara's lips twitched in a barely concealed smile. "That's rude, Jack." "Hey, I'm just making observations," Jack said, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm new to this whole alien party thing." The momentary laughter between them felt like a breath of fresh air. But Jack couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that something, everything, was completely out of his control. He was surrounded by species he couldn't even begin to understand, in a room full of cultural customs he hadn't learned yet. His brain was overloaded, and all he wanted was to go home. He wanted his couch, his TV, and his remote. He wanted to forget about this whole absurd mess. Before he could voice his concerns, a server approached with a tray of glowing, multicolored drinks. The alien, a slender creature with 3 sets of eyes, offered them with a toothy grin. "Drink, human? A gift to our honored guest?" it asked, its voice soft but alien-sounding, like it was speaking through water. Jack eyed the drink with suspicion. It glowed faintly and looked like something out of a science fiction movie, bright and iridescent, like liquid sunlight trapped in a glass. He had no idea what it was, but he didn't want to look rude by refusing. Plus, he figured it might be a way to blend in. Sure, why not? Jack said, taking the drink with a forced smile. Zara watched him closely, an amused gleam in her eyes as she sipped her own beverage. Jack tried not to show how much it burned as it slid down his throat. It was a lot stronger than he expected, and it left a strange, tingling aftertaste that lingered. He forced a grin, trying not to cough. Zara raised an eyebrow. Is it to your liking? Jack could only manage a cough and a weak thumbs up, still trying to get the burning sensation out of his throat. It's fine, he rasped. Definitely an acquired taste. Zara smirked, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Most guests say that about our drinks. They're very potent. Yeah, I can tell, Jack muttered, still feeling the aftereffects of the drink. He wanted to make a witty comment, but his brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. Instead, he found himself zoning out as the room swirled around him, his mind starting to blur together like the kaleidoscope of alien colors. It wasn't long before the crowd began to separate, and one by one, the dignitaries approached the newly-wed couple. Jack found himself shaking hands with various alien leaders, some of whom had tentacles, others with more than 2 sets of eyes. Some of them barely even looked human, and Jack had to suppress a shudder when he realized just how different his species was from these galactic elites. Despite the weirdness of the whole situation, though, it wasn't the alien looks that made Jack feel out of place. It was the constant, awkward probing of his marriage to Zara. So human, one particularly slimy-looking alien said, his face like a wrinkled eggplant with glowing purple eyes. How do you feel about your arrangement with Princess Zara? Jack forced a smile. Oh, it's great. Really, couldn't be better. He nearly choked on his words, realizing how disingenuous they sounded. I mean, just a casual thing, intergalactic marriage, no big deal. The alien's smile stretched wider, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I hear Earthlings are quite passionate creatures. Does that mean your bond with Princess Zara will be intense? Jack blinked. Was that a question about sex? He felt his face flush, and he glanced nervously at Zara, who was suddenly very interested in the conversation she was having with another guest. Well, I mean, we're just getting started, Jack stammered, internally panicking. But I'm sure it'll be, fine. Really fine. Maybe a little too fine. The alien leaned in closer, practically hissing with delight. You'll find that bonding with royalty is quite a challenge. I'm sure Princess Zara will be a most stimulating partner. At that moment, Jack swore he could feel his face go completely red. The last thing he wanted was to have a conversation about intimacy with an alien who looked like a rejected horror movie extra. He nervously glanced at Zara again, and she finally caught his eye, her lips twitching with a barely concealed laugh. Is everything all right, Jack? She asked, her tone thick with amusement. Jack felt his stomach churn as he muttered, I think I need a drink. He quickly turned away from the alien, seeking a safe haven at the bar, trying to ignore the alien whispers behind him. He wasn't sure which was worse, the fact that he was being forced into a marriage with a beautiful alien princess, or the intense, increasingly inappropriate questions about their potential relationship. Either way, it felt like he was trapped in a bizarre reality TV show, one where the rules made absolutely no sense, and the viewers were all aliens who had no idea what personal space was. As he stood at the bar, desperately trying to regain some semblance of normalcy, Zara appeared beside him, her expression a perfect blend of curiosity and mischief. You handled that well, she said, her eyes twinkling. You didn't flinch once when he asked about our stimulating future together. Jack shot her a sideways glance. Don't you dare laugh, Zara. I'm not cut out for this. Oh, Jack, she replied, her voice softening. You'd be surprised. You might just be better at this than you think. Jack had never been good at pretending. He could bluff his way through an awkward dinner party, or lie his way through an unimportant work meeting, but this was different. This wasn't just a game of charades, it was his future on the line, and the stakes were as high as they got. Still, he couldn't help but feel like the universe was having a laugh at his expense. The entire royal banquet was a surreal experience. Alien species in all shapes and sizes swirled around him, some gracefully floating on air, others moving like serpents, and a few with more appendages than Jack cared to count. There were more types of food and drink than he could ever identify, some of which looked like they could poison a person with just one wrong sip. He'd learned that the hard way earlier when he'd taken a drink that had left his tongue feeling like it had just been electrocuted. At least the spicy firewater had a side effect. He could no longer taste the incredibly strange meal he'd been served. For a moment, he just stared at his plate, wondering if he'd been cursed or was somehow hallucinating. But it wasn't the food or the drink that made him uneasy. No, it was the fact that Zara had been placed on an almost literal pedestal in front of all the galaxy's elite. She was the prize, the one everyone wanted to speak to, the one everyone wanted to congratulate, the one everyone was buzzing about. And here he was, pretending to be the man who would save her from a lifetime of royal obligations. He wasn't even sure what kind of king or emperor they wanted her to be. All he knew was that he was in way over his head. "So, Jack," a deep voice rumbled next to him. He glanced to his side and saw one of the palace's ambassadors, a towering alien with 6 arms and glowing yellow eyes, staring down at him. "How do you feel about intergalactic unions?" Jack forced a grin, hoping to project an air of confidence he absolutely did not feel. "Well, it's a lot to take in. I never thought I'd be here, honestly. I've got a lot of catching up to do." The ambassador nodded slowly, his gaze appraising Jack like he was some sort of rare, exotic species. "Indeed. There are many traditions you are unaware of, I'm sure. But a human marrying into our royal family, very rare. And very interesting." Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. You'll find that the traditions are quite intimate," the ambassador continued, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "Bonding rituals. Customs. They are." He glanced around, then leaned in closer. "Not what you would expect." Jack's stomach churned, and he nervously looked over to Zara. She was deep in conversation with a few other dignitaries, her body language relaxed as though she was enjoying the spectacle. But Jack didn't have that luxury. His mind was racing, and with every word from the ambassador, he could feel his chances of escaping this marriage slip further and further out of reach. All he could think about was the fact that he had no idea what kind of intimate customs were on the horizon. "And, of course," the ambassador added with a sly grin, "you will want to please her, yes?" Jack's face flushed, and he nearly dropped his glass. I mean, we're still figuring things out." The ambassador raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the human experience. So interesting. So free-spirited." "I wouldn't exactly put it like that," Jack said, trying to steer the conversation in a less uncomfortable direction. "But yeah, we're getting there." "Good," the ambassador said, his voice still thick with intrigue. "But remember, your bond is not just personal. It is political, a symbol of unity. You must show the galaxy that this union is solid." Jack thought his head might explode. He wasn't just trying to avoid a diplomatic catastrophe. Now he was supposed to make this whole marriage look real? "Sure," Jack muttered, not even trying to hide his sarcasm. "Solid. Of course." The ambassador smiled knowingly, clearly enjoying Jack's discomfort. "Indeed. Just make sure you do your part, and the galaxy will see the bond. It will not be an easy road, but rewarding." Before Jack could respond, the ambassador was off, floating toward the other guests, leaving Jack with his drink and his thoughts. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control. He had no idea what was expected of him, and the more he tried to navigate the alien customs, the more he felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. He took a deep breath and made his way toward Zara, who was now standing with a group of her fellow royalty. She looked stunning, as always, but there was something about the way she was positioned, gracious and poised, that made Jack feel more like a sidekick than a partner. He approached cautiously, hoping to catch her attention without drawing too much attention to himself. Zara noticed him right away, her eyes lighting up with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Jack," she said, her voice smooth and warm. "Everything all right?" Jack grinned nervously. "Oh, just peachy," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "You know, just living the dream." Zara smirked, clearly not buying his act. "You look like you're about to faint. Is it the food? Or the ambassadors? I've seen you talking to a few of them. Let's just say I'm not a fan of all the bonding rituals everyone keeps talking about," Jack admitted, lowering his voice. "I'm kind of out of my element here, Zara." She studied him for a moment, a flicker of sympathy in her gaze. "You're not the only one, Jack. This whole thing is insane. But trust me, we'll figure it out. Together." The way she said "together" gave Jack a small sense of relief, though it did little to quiet the storm brewing in his mind. He was in way too deep. But the longer he spent around Zara, the more he realized that despite all the bizarre customs and the overwhelming cultural differences, there was something between them. It wasn't just about saving her life anymore. There was chemistry, something unexpected, something real. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to get him through the upcoming rituals. "I'm still not sure I'm cut out for this royal life," Jack muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Zara chuckled softly. "You'll do just fine, Jack. You'll make the best of it. You always do." Jack's mind was still reeling from the night's events, but the gravity of the situation was starting to sink in. It wasn't just about saving Zara anymore. It wasn't about dodging intergalactic marriage customs. This wasn't some simple diplomatic affair. This was his life now, tangled up in traditions and expectations that seemed to have no end. He had no choice but to go along with it. At least, that's what he told himself. The next morning, things didn't get any easier. Zara had summoned him to a private room in the palace, and Jack's stomach churned with anxiety as he walked through the grand halls, every step seeming to echo louder in his head. As he reached the door, he paused, taking a deep breath. This was it, the moment where everything would either click or fall apart. When the door opened, Zara was standing there, wearing a loose robe of shimmering fabric. The way the light hit her, she looked almost otherworldly, and for a split second, Jack forgot the looming threat of the marriage, the awkward conversations, and the weight of being dragged into an alien political system. She was just Zara, and in that moment she made him feel more human than he had since stepping foot on her planet. "Jack!" she greeted him with a soft smile. "Come in. We need to talk." Jack stepped inside, his heart racing. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" Zara crossed the room with a purposeful grace, settling onto a cushion at the center of the room. She patted the spot next to her, inviting him to sit. As Jack made his way over, he couldn't help but notice the way her eyes lingered on him, as though she were studying him carefully. "You've been avoiding me," she said, her voice calm but laced with curiosity. "I wouldn't say I've been avoiding you," Jack replied with a nervous chuckle. "More like, trying to figure out how to get out of this whole marriage thing without insulting the entire galaxy." Zara laughed lightly, a sound that was so genuine it put Jack at ease, if only for a moment. "I understand. It's a lot to take in. But this isn't just about politics, Jack. It's about us." Jack froze, his mind scrambling. "Us? What do you mean?" Zara shifted closer, her gaze soft but intense. "I'm not just some alien princess. You didn't just save my life to check off a box on some diplomatic form. There's something between us. I can feel it. And I think you feel it too." Jack's breath hitched in his chest. He hadn't been expecting this moment where everything went from strange and awkward to real. He stopped, unsure of how to respond. "Zara, I'm not really the marriage type. Hell, I don't even know how to date in a way that doesn't end in disaster." Zara's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I know. I've seen your awkwardness with the ambassadors and the customs. But that's why I like you, Jack. You're genuine. You don't try to be something you're not. Jack let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, well, I don't know how long that's going to last in this galaxy full of weird traditions. She tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. Maybe that's exactly why you're the right person for this. You're not bogged down by the rules. You're you? I'm not sure that's a good thing, Jack muttered, rubbing his neck. It's a great thing, she insisted. You just need to stop worrying about all the expectations and start thinking about what you want. This isn't just about the political benefits anymore. It's about us figuring out what this, she gestured between them, is going to be. Jack stared at her, his pulse quickening. This wasn't some fantasy romance from a sci-fi movie. This was real. And it wasn't as simple as he thought. There was no running away from this. Not anymore. Zara, I'm just a guy from Earth. I'm not some prince or galactic hero. I don't even know how I ended up here, Jack said, his voice low. I don't know how to be part of a royal family. I don't know how to be, royal. You don't have to be anything other than what you are, she replied softly. We'll figure it out together. The galaxy's got its expectations, sure. But I think we can rewrite the rules if we want to. Jack couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh that came from relief. It was nervous, unsure, and very much a sign that he was out of his depth. Rewrite the rules, huh? Well, I'm all for breaking a few. But I still don't know how we're going to pull this off. I mean, what's next? More weird customs? More aliens wanting to bond with me? His eyes widened slightly. Are we talking about, physical stuff? Zara raised an eyebrow. If you're asking if there's an expectation for intimacy, well, yes. But don't worry. I'm not going to drag you into anything you're not ready for. Jack relaxed a bit, though his nerves were still on edge. Well, that's a relief. But I guess I'm gonna need some help here. I mean, you said we'll figure it out together, but do you have a plan? Zara leaned forward, her expression suddenly serious. I think the plan is simple, Jack. We start with what feels right. Forget the politics for a second. Forget the pressure. Let's see where this goes, one step at a time. Jack considered her words. For the first time in days, a strange sense of calm settled over him. Maybe, just maybe, Zara wasn't as far out of reach as he thought. Maybe this whole marriage thing wasn't the burden he made it out to be. Maybe it could be something more than just a diplomatic obligation. Okay, Jack said finally, his voice steady. Let's give this a shot. Zara smiled, and Jack could see the genuine warmth in her expression. Maybe he didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure, he was in it. Whatever this was, whatever was coming next, he was ready. Jack stood at the edge of the balcony, the stars shining brightly against the deep void of space. He tried to ignore the tension in his gut, the sense of impending doom that seemed to follow him around ever since he had accidentally stumbled into this mess. The air around him was crisp, yet it felt heavy, as though the universe itself were waiting for him to make a decision. And it was a decision he wasn't sure he was ready for. He had agreed to go along with the whole marriage thing. But that was before Zara had thrown him that look earlier, before he had begun to feel something more than just obligation. His head spun with conflicting thoughts, each one tugging at him in different directions. There were parts of him that wanted to run, to escape, to put all of this behind him. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't the chosen one. He was just Jack from Earth, nothing more, nothing less. Yet here he was, engaged to an alien princess, expected to live up to an alien tradition that had no place in his world. But then there was Zara. Beautiful, intelligent, and disarmingly honest, she had somehow made this whole impossible situation feel possible. He couldn't deny the way his heart fluttered when she looked at him with that soft, almost vulnerable gaze. There was something there. Something real. But could he really commit to this life? To her? To a future that seemed to be entirely out of his control? Jack? Zara's voice interrupted his thoughts, her soft tone cutting through the noise in his head. He turned to face her, his heart skipping a beat when he saw her standing there. She looked different tonight, less regal, more human. Her robes were simpler, more relaxed, and she had that same look of quiet determination on her face that he had come to recognize. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual. But his nerves were getting the best of him, and the words came out too strained. "What's up?" Zara walked over to him, her steps slow but purposeful. There was an intensity in her eyes that hadn't been there before, something deeper. It made him swallow hard. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low and steady. "About us. About everything. And I need to know what you really want, Jack. Because we can't go on like this. Not if we're just doing it for the sake of tradition." Jack's stomach tightened. He had known this was coming. He had been waiting for it. But that didn't make it any easier. "I don't know what I want," he admitted, his voice soft. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I can be what you need me to be." Zara stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "And what if what I need isn't some perfect hero? What if it's just you? Imperfect, awkward, clueless you?" His heart thudded in his chest. For a moment, he forgot everything, the politics, the expectations, the alien marriage. All he could focus on was the sincerity in her voice, the honesty in her gaze. "You want me?" he asked, the question coming out before he could stop it. Zara smiled, a soft, knowing smile that tugged at something deep within him. "I do. And I think you want me too." Jack could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. He had never been one for confrontation, especially not emotional confrontation, and this was definitely pushing his limits. But there was no denying it. He did want her. It was there, in the pit of his stomach, a growing fire that he couldn't ignore any longer. I guess I do," he said quietly. His voice felt foreign to him, as if he was admitting something he had been hiding for a long time. But it felt right. Zara stepped even closer, her fingers brushing lightly against his. The touch sent a shock of electricity through him, and he couldn't stop the instinctive pull toward her. She was so close now, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "Then let's stop pretending," Zara murmured, her lips barely a breath away from his. "Let's stop pretending this is some political arrangement. Let's stop pretending we're not both feeling this." She kissed him, and Jack's world tilted on its axis. For a moment he was lost in the kiss, lost in the way her lips fit so perfectly against his, the way her hands slid up his chest. All of the confusion, the hesitation, the doubts, everything melted away. It was just them. Just this moment. Just the undeniable connection that had been building between them since the very first time they had met. When they pulled apart, breathless, Jack couldn't help but smile. He felt lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Maybe this wasn't as complicated as he had made it out to be. Maybe he didn't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe he just needed to trust himself, and trust her. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'm in. Let's stop pretending." Zara's eyes sparkled with something close to joy. "You're sure?" He nodded, the confidence in his voice surprising even him. "Yeah. I'm sure." For a long moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other. And in that silence, Jack realized something. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know how all of this would play out. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it. Zara took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Good," she said, her voice soft but full of determination. "Now let's do this." And in that moment, Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. No more running. No more hiding. Just the two of them, figuring it out, one step at a time. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples as if he could will the situation to make more sense. The days had blurred into one chaotic mess of cultural missteps, increasingly absurd traditions, and his own deepening confusion about what the hell he was doing here. In a way, it had become a full-time job just trying to keep up with the political intricacies of this alien world, let alone the emotional complexities of being engaged to Zara, a princess of a foreign galaxy. He had done his best to avoid the impending marriage ceremony, throwing every excuse he could find into the mix. From questioning the authenticity of their so-called tradition, to pretending to have an allergy to the ceremonial fabrics, to even suggesting he might need a crash course in alien courtship rituals, nothing had worked. Every single attempt to escape had failed spectacularly. And now, somehow, he found himself standing on the precipice of a full-blown intergalactic marriage, all because of one damn decision to save Zara's life. What's the worst that could happen? Jack muttered to himself, pacing back and forth in the cramped quarters. He had spent weeks trying to play it cool, trying to make light of it all. He had even convinced himself at times that this wasn't so bad. But now, as the ceremony loomed closer, reality had come crashing down. He wasn't ready. He didn't understand half of the things he was supposed to understand, and the last thing he wanted to do was embarrass himself, and worse, embarrass Zara. He couldn't stop imagining the absurdities that would surely come with being married to an alien princess. It wasn't exactly the romantic, fairy tale wedding he'd always imagined. He'd always dreamed of something far more mundane, like an open bar and dancing. This was an entirely different level of crazy. Jack took a deep breath and flopped back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Zara's face had been on his mind constantly lately. He couldn't deny that he had feelings for her. Hell, he'd had them since the first time their eyes met. There was something intoxicating about her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and she seemed to get him in ways that no one else ever had. But that didn't make him feel any more prepared for what was about to happen. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to marry her. It wasn't that he didn't care about her, on the contrary, his feelings had only grown over the past few weeks, and they were stronger than he had ever expected. But this wasn't just a marriage. This was a political alliance. There were ramifications, consequences, things he couldn't wrap his head around, let alone understand. Suddenly, the door slid open, and there she was, standing in the doorway like a vision out of his dreams. Zara had a way of making everything seem brighter, more vibrant, even when everything around them was falling apart. But her expression today was different. It was serious, almost too serious, and it made Jack's stomach churn with anxiety. "Hey," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Zara didn't respond right away. She stepped inside, her gaze locking onto his with an intensity that felt almost suffocating. "Jack," she said, her voice low and measured, "I need you to understand something." He sat up, suddenly more alert, his heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment she was going to tell him to run. To leave. To get out before it all went too far. "I understand that this marriage, it's not just about us," she began, walking slowly toward him. "It's about everything. About my people, my family, my future. And if we do this, Jack, if we make this work, it's going to change everything." Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying to keep his nerves in check. "I get it, okay? This isn't just about me and you. I know. It's about all this diplomacy stuff. The fate of your empire or whatever. I get it." Zara stood in front of him now, her eyes softening, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. "It is, yes. But it's also about us. I think we both know that. You might not understand all of it, but I believe you understand me. Don't you?" Jack's breath hitched. It was one of those moments where his heart and head were completely out of sync, where everything he'd been trying to avoid collided with everything he wanted. He stood up slowly, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, looking down at his feet for a second, then meeting her eyes. "I don't know how to do this, Zara. I don't even know if I'm the right guy for this. I'm not some noble hero. I'm just—" Zara cut him off gently by placing a hand on his chest. "You're the one who saved my life. You've already done more than enough." Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. There was something in her eyes, something that told him maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Maybe it didn't have to be perfect. Maybe it wasn't about fitting into some neat, pre-made box of what their marriage should look like. Maybe it was just about being honest with each other and trying to figure it out along the way. I don't know if I'm cut out for all this royalty stuff, he said, his voice dropping a bit. But I know I don't want to screw this up. Not with you. Zara smiled, her thumb gently brushing across his chest. We'll figure it out together, she said, her voice full of determination. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. And that's all I need. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, something in him clicked. Maybe it wasn't about doing things the right way. Maybe it was about doing them together. And if he was going to marry her, if they were going to face all the ridiculousness of her world together, it was going to be on his own terms, with his own sense of humor, and maybe a little bit of awkwardness along the way. He grinned. Well, in that case, guess we better start figuring this out, huh? Zara laughed softly, leaning into him. That's the spirit. And in that moment, Jack realized something. He might not know everything. He might not be ready for this whole alien marriage thing, but with Zara by his side, he wasn't nearly as scared as he had been.